Welcome to Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we'll be discussing The Bad Batch, Episode 12, Rescue on Ryloth. Who is we? I'm Paul Hoppe, aka Zen Madman, and in the absence of Matthew, I'll be hosting today along with my co-hosts three, Sarah and Riki Hayashi of Clone Wars podcasting fame, and Scotty St. Clair of Animation Deliberation podcast. We'll be discussing what happens when the episode title tells you exactly what's going to happen in the episode. But first, it's time for an ad that we have absolutely no control over. Welcome back. I'm joined, as I said before, by Sarah, Riki, and Scotty. How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, hanging in there, doing okay.
I've never watched Star Wars so early in the day.
That's not true. You watched that Bad Batch episode the last time.
Come on, I'm trying to do a thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's never watched Star Wars so early in the day.
Doing good over here. Always a good Friday when we can watch some Bad Batch and talk about it. So excited to be here with you folks to do just that.
Excellent. Me too. I watched it both very late and very early, although I only got through about like halfway through when I realized I should probably come up with like an outline for this podcasting thing. I figure everybody has had enough experience being on these that like conversation will just kind of organically generate itself. But I thought like maybe let's start with the episode title. Does anybody have any feelings about like episode titles basically being like, here's what's going to happen in the episode?
Sometimes, yes. For this one, because it was sort of a two-parter, like we're continuing on from last episode where the Syndulas were imprisoned, I'm less bothered by it because, like, I don't know. If it was going to be the same episode, they were going to go rescue them. If we were going to, like, move on to a different episode, I don't know. The other stuff would have happened. So it didn't upset me that much because it seemed like a bit of a foregone conclusion, but like I get where you're coming from.
I think this is also a callback, though, to the Clone Wars episodes featuring Cham Syndulla and the planet of Ryloth, because I believe the first one was Liberation of Ryloth, and then it followed like a couple more episodes that all mention the planet Ryloth. So that's just kind of like their pattern.
It could be a more clever title, I will say that, but at least it has the alliteration going for it. I'll give it that. Rescue on Ryloth has kind of a nice ring to it.
That's true. I always appreciate a good alliteration. It actually didn't bother me at all. I just it kind of stuck out to me. I think in this series it bothers me less than it might in another show because this series is a prequel or an intraquel kind of series. It's like a sequel to the Clone Wars. I mean, Clone Wars Season 8, basically, right? But especially if you've seen Rebels, we know how some things work out. So I kind of actually sort of appreciate that they're like, hey, look, we're not really going to jerk you around with suspense. Like, we know kind of where some things are going. It's about the journey, really, more than, and that's kind of how the show is for me, is I've really, I don't know, I've been surprised how much I've enjoyed it. Like, not super surprised, but, like, I wasn't expecting much out of it, and I'm like, oh, I like this show. It's a nice show. Like, and in terms of sort of the whole prequel nature of the series, I feel like this episode, we actually did get a good amount of that sort of, like, the rise of the Empire, and more specifically, I'm gonna go to the feedback early, because my outline is garbage. So Brian V. Klein said if you could add some quick feedback. I was pleased to see the regs finally standing up to the Empire's treatment of the Twi'leks.
Definitely.
And I'm going to call him Bowser in honor of Matthew, because somebody has to get a name wrong somewhere. No, so Hauser. I thought that was, but that's at the end. Why don't we do an episode summary? Who would like to give us like an untimed summary of the episode?
I'll go ahead. So this is a continuation of the last episode, where at the end of that we saw Cham Syndulla, the Twi'lek freedom fighter, and his kind of cohorts captured by the Empire, by Admiral Rampart. And so it starts with them in prison, and their daughter, Hera Syndulla, is out and free with her droid Chopper, and they are trying to gather intel and work on freeing the freedom fighters. So she reaches out to Omega, part of the Bad Batch, and makes contact and asks for help. They come to the planet. There's some talk about, tactical situations, and they come up with a plan to attack the Imperial refinery on the outskirts of the city to draw out some forces so that it leaves the main citadel in the middle of the city free for infiltration. And they end up freeing the freedom fighters and having a little showdown, as they said, with some clones, as well as Crosshair, although they don't meet face to face. Everyone escape. The good folks escape, and then Crosshair gets permission from Admiral Rampart to go hunting for the Bad Batch, setting up probably like this final arc confrontation between those two.
All right, thank you for the summary. Yeah, it definitely feels like this is setting up that sort of like home stretch arc, right? Mm-hmm. With like Crosshair pursuing them across. Maybe there will be some other sort of like mini missions, but he'll probably be like chasing them in the background or something. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There was a line that kind of stuck out to me, where the basis of the episode is kind of like Hera, like she tries to get the Bad Batch to help by talking to Omega. Right, who she kind of bonded with in the previous episode. Right. And it seems like Hunter is kind of like, well, I don't know. There's a line where she says, where Hunter says, we can't put ourselves on the line every time someone's in trouble. And she said, and Omega says, why not? Isn't that what soldiers do? Like, is that what soldiers do?
I knew it. I even wrote that down because I knew Paul would have something to say about that.
I appreciate that.
It's a very like idealized vision of soldiers, right? Like that's what we want to think that they do. Right. And in the real world, sadly, it's not true.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that it's not true. But yeah, like in this fantasy setting, like where the Bad Batch are nominally the heroes of this story, it's a good line, and I think it plays well. But yeah, don't step too far back.
I feel like that's what heroes do, right? And there's definitely in society a desire to view soldiers as heroes, and I think, I won't get too deeply into it, but I do think that there is like a desire to be doing that, and it's just, in that, but like the Empire has a lot of soldiers too, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe they're not all doing the best because the Empire, and so I guess we kind of maybe are more apt to hold the Empire responsible for that. But I think in this episode we actually get a really interesting look at that, though, where Hauser is, at the end of the episode is like, no, this isn't what I signed up for, basically. I mean, Hauser's a clone soldier and so didn't actually sign up for anything. Right. But did work with Cham Syndulla, right, and with the Twi'lek on Ryloth, where the backstory of Ryloth in the Clone Wars is that it's a planet that gets taken over by the Separatists, right, and it's oppressed by the Separatists, and so Cham Syndulla and others are these like freedom fighters who are trying to liberate the planet from the Separatists. But then the Republic comes in and is like, oh, well, don't worry, we've got it covered now. And he was skeptical of that, and then now they're the Empire. Right,
and so the senator from Ryloth, Orn Free Ta, is a Twi'lek, but he spends most of his time on Coruscant, and is just kind of portrayed as one of these fat cat bureaucrats who makes a personal profit off of a situation and doesn't actually care about the rights and freedoms of his own people.
I was grateful we got the clarification there coming off the last episode. I know we were kind of wondering the attempted assassination attempt, and then sure enough, Admiral Rampart reveals to that dialogue he's going to make a full recovery. So I'm glad they didn't leave us hanging in that regard.
Yeah, I was actually super confused by that, because at the end of the last episode, when they arrest them for attempted assassination, I was like, well, I guess you did point a blaster at Ta. Like, are you counting that as attempted assassination? And they kept talking about it being an attempted assassination. And I was like, I mean, kind of. They did kind of sort of attempt, I guess. And then, Rampart said something about, like, when they shot him, And I was like, okay, but wouldn't that be an assassination? And then came the clarification that, like, no, he's still alive. It's okay.
It was a little confusing. Right. So at the end of the last episode, there's a confrontation where Cham Syndulla is holding a gun, pointed at the senator and the Imperials. And then he chooses not to shoot the senator because his daughter Hera is watching, and he wants to set a good example. But then the Imperial Admiral, orders Crosshair, who is secretly hiding up in the cliffs, to open fire and shoot the senator. And they're trying to set up Cham, right, for this attempted assassination. And absolutely, like, it was not clear at that point whether the senator was alive or not, so it was a bit confusing there.
Mm-hmm. For sure. At the end of it, I would have thought at first that they would, like, kill the senator, because then it would be kind of a more compelling, story. But on the other hand, it seems like the senator is so willing to be complicit with them in, their subjugation of his planet. He probably has a little more pull. Like, they need, one of the Twi'leks to be like, oh, we're fine, like, I'm doing this for all of you, and this is going to be the best for us. So, maintaining, since he has actually been, loyal to the Empire and is influential, I think it makes sense to keep him alive, but it was certainly very vague at the end of the last episode. And, I mean, you could even say that it wasn't, like, Cham didn't actually attempt to assassinate, but he was, like, about to shoot him, right? Yeah. He was like, I'm going to shoot you. And he's like, oh, I guess I won't. But, like, it seems like that's the sort of thing you could still arrest someone for. Like, you don't need any trumped up charges. It's like, that's probably illegal. Like,
yeah, waving a blaster around at someone, threatening to kill them. Like, that has to be, that's something. And I feel like you definitely, if you weren't actually going to kill Ta, you probably could have done this. I mean, maybe a little bit more bloated and like, well, now you have to be in prison for life, when maybe this wouldn't actually be the charge. But yeah, the getting Crosshairs to non-lethally shoot Ta seems a little bit like overkill, but
right,
I don't know. Yeah,
I think they needed to turn Ta against Cham, like, completely. If we don't have that shot, I think that leaves open the possibility that they could reconcile and work together. But if Ta feels that Cham or one of his followers shot him, I think that cuts that tie pretty completely.
I was just going to say, on the subject of things that are a little bit confusing, how are we feeling about Hauser? He was pretty quick to respond to Admiral Rampart when he asked him who was the one that fired the shot. And he says, I don't know. He didn't really think about it. So I was wondering, he looked up at the cliffside in the previous episode. Did he see Crosshair? Because all across this episode, he and Crosshair had kind of those, like, stealing glances at each other. There felt like there was a rivalry. And even in the last episode, I kind of speculated that there might be conflict with them going forward. So do you think Hauser knew that it was Crosshair, or just a strong suspicion? Or?
Oh, yeah, I thought he knew and was just giving like, I don't know, as a...
Oh. I disagree.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think he knew. I think part of it is just my understanding of Crosshair and, like, his role is that he's a sniper, and, like, he's got the darker armor. So I think he's very covert. I don't know. I don't think there's much clear evidence one way or the other.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that can be implied, or that we can try to infer what happened, but it doesn't seem explicit in any way. My reading of the situation originally was kind of that, like, it was Crosshair, and, like, because they showed us so clearly, I kind of didn't think about the fact that the characters down on the ground wouldn't have seen him so clearly, and that maybe the senator would think that it was one of Cham's fighters, right? And that might actually be a convincing story. It's like, well, of course it was Crosshair, but it's like, oh, well, maybe not. I mean, like, it's a really good point. He's a sniper. He's in darker armor. He's hiding. Like, he probably knows how to take a shot and then disappear, right? So,
for sure.
I think I agree with Riki in terms of, like, how I see it now, but at the time I definitely thought that kind of, like, everybody knew. But now I'm like, oh, why would they, though? So, I don't know. I guess we'll see, right? But I definitely also felt that tension between Hauser and Crosshair.
Certainly.
And thought that was interesting.
Oh, yeah.
right up to the end. I mean,
well, I mean, it's interesting because like Hauser still ostensibly has his chip in place, but it's at like normal Order 66 like only functioning level, right? So he still he doesn't have the sort of ultimate compliance the way that Crosshair kind of does. So like we still get to see his kind of underlying morals are like coming through, which I think might also be like another point in the column for Tarkin as to why we need to move away from clone soldiers and like get real people. But I mean, I don't know, clones can be real people too.
I think this has been discussed on this podcast before by other folks, but it's my personal belief that Order 66 is specifically a Jedi execution order and not a you will comply with everything that the Empire tells you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the like enhancement of the chips seems to be to this like ultimate compliance for like Crosshair.
I just think that that's Crosshair. I think they did turn it up a little maybe, but he's also just an a-hole and wants to shoot people.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah, it feels like it fits with your sniper. Like your job is literally just to shoot and kill people. Yeah. Like there's no additional, you're not doing an extraction. You're just like, that person, I'm going to shoot that person. And I like the story better if it is basically just Crosshair's like execute Order 66, but beyond that, it's just Crosshair being Crosshair. If there is some agency beyond the kill the Jedi or don't kill the Jedi. And I like that reading of it. I think it's abundantly unclear. Like they really haven't been explicit about that. Like, why would they be dialing up Crosshair's chip if the only point was to kill the Jedi? And then, like, why did Wrecker try to... Like, is it to kill the Jedi, but also kill anybody who opposes killing of the Jedi?
Yeah.
So would Wrecker attack the rest of the Bad Batch because they didn't kill Caleb? I don't know.
It could be, like, he seemed to think that they were, like, traitors.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I kind of agree with Crosshair's just being a jerkwad. Like, if you're so committed to shooting people that you get a tattoo over your eyeball, like, you're in, I guess.
Bullseye.
Right? But I feel like, so yeah, like, he's just a jerk. But there's also, like, they're really explicitly showing the scarring on the side of his head where he's had like the chip surgery, to sort of remind you that he has gone through this like augmented procedure. So I feel like there has to be something chip related that's like turning up his jerkwad levels, or like repressing his morals a little bit. I don't know. That's just me though.
Well, I mean, since pretty close to the beginning, I've been on I don't think there's a way back for Crosshair. Mm-hmm. And now the further we've gone in the story, I'm more convinced of that. There's going to be a final confrontation. There's going to be some kind of moment where it's like, no, but you're our brother, Crosshair, like, come back. And he's just going to be like, nah, I'm all in on the Empire.
I'm fully on board with you there, Riki, and that's the way I want it to go as well. But there have been a few moments throughout the series that have kind of made me go in the opposite direction. The first was, on Braca, having Wrecker succumb to the conditioning, but then so quickly to have the resolution there made me think, okay, maybe there is hope for Crosshair after all. But it was actually this episode, we talk about the rivalry with Hauser there, but that moment at the end where, Hauser came out and said, brothers, what are we doing? There was that look in Crosshair's eye, and I think he was reminded of the fact that they are his brothers. So as much as he's being set up to hunt them down, that shot at the escaping vessel was not typical of his accuracy. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's something pulling at those very weak heartstrings there.
I will admit, I fully thought that Hauser was going to die there at the end. I thought the Crosshair was going to shoot him when he made that speech. So there's a point that maybe he did not because somehow that speech got through to him.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, I think there was a very interesting dynamic in this episode of sort of, Crosshair and Hunter and, they're kind of trying to outsmart each other, and they do match wits, even though they don't actually square off face to face. But I feel like with each of their interaction with Hauser, specifically around that at the end, where Hauser was like, no, I can't leave my squad. You know, I have to give them a chance, basically. That, to me, Hunter's reaction to that sort of made me feel like Hunter wants to try and, you know, do something with Crosshair, try and get Crosshair out of the Empire and remove the chip or whatever. And, you know, and then that's a really good point about Crosshair's reaction to Hauser. I totally thought Hauser was just going to get shot, and, like, I was kind of ready to hate it. I was like, why are you going to stay and just get yourself shot? Like, come on, like, you know? But, like, the fact that they just arrested him, and that does kind of make sense. It's like, yeah, they are all brothers, and it's like, they're not just going to shoot each other just because, like, especially when, you know, Hauser throws down his gun, right? He's not like, I'm against the Empire and, like, pointing his gun at everybody. He's like, I'm throwing down my arms. I'm not going to fight for this cause. Who's with me? And then the people who are with him disarm themselves. So it's like, yeah, it seems like arresting them is, like, the logical thing to do if you're like, oh, you can't do that. Like, then maybe they'll have a trial, and then we'll have Rescue on Ryloth Part 2, or I don't know. But
yeah. Oh, and especially like the fact that there were so many other troopers who were with Hauser and like threw down their weapons and agreed that they didn't want to. Like, if it was just Hauser and he said, "Who's with me?" and it was no one, then I think that the chances of Hauser being shot like increased tremendously. But the fact that there were so many, that were with him, like. You could shoot all of them, but at that point, just arresting them seems to make more sense. Yeah.
But it also goes back to, I think you made a point earlier, Sarah, of like this transition to stormtroopers away from clone troopers. Like that many clone troopers chose to lay down their arms in this moment maybe shows that their overall morality is not what the Empire wants out of their soldiers.
Well, and their loyalty to each other, right? Like, if you just grab randos from the street, they don't have this built-in, like, brotherhood. Whereas, like, the clones are all very loyal to each other, and maybe less so to the Empire. Emperor. Both.
Yeah, if you're drawing soldiers from all these different parts of the galaxy, and you're having them fight, and then some of them rebel, it's like, well, I don't know you from whoever, but in this case, they're all literally related, and there is some, you know, they all literally grew up in the same planet, too, right? So there's this huge shared experience as well as, you know, genetics. And I think that, I feel like actually the shared experience is as important or more important than just like that they're clones of one another. You know, I mean, they call each other brothers, but they also grew up under very controlled circumstances that are very similar to one another. And I think that has a lot to do with kind of their, you know, emotional ties to one another.
Yeah, agreed. Point. Yeah. And siblinghood is such a strong motif, not only for this episode, but obviously for the series, but it's mirrored with, you know, the things that are going on with Hera and Omega. And we've talked about on this very cast how the family relationship within the Bad Batch, it's almost like Hunter is the father and we call Wrecker Uncle Wrecker, but we have to remember that they really are brothers and sister. And just to have Omega like reinforce that, it kind of surprised me a little bit, but it's so true. And then Hera has that line, like, keep an eye on them, like, help them stay true, because we talk about what do soldiers do. Soldiers are they're supposed to go in and rescue according to this show or whatever, but they are very much still soldiers of fortune at this point in time. And it really seems like it's going to be Omega that is the heart and soul of this group and their moral compass. So really appreciated that aspect.
And we got that nice A-Team moment where Hunter refuses the payment. It's like classic.
That's so true. Speaking of Hera, who's seen Rebels?
Yeah.
I don't want to get too many spoilery. Yeah, so Sarah and Riki have?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
we have.
You don't have to worry about spoiling for me. But if you don't want to spoil for the audience, I understand.
For the audience as well, who I think maybe... I don't know when you're planning on doing the Rebels coverage, but I would imagine maybe right after the Bad Batch makes sense. Obviously, people's schedules and everything. Yeah. But it doesn't pick up right after the Bad Batch chronologically, but it is after the Bad Batch chronologically. Hera is a character that we see a lot of in Rebels. Does Hera feel like Hera to you? And sort of like how does she feel in this episode and the previous episode compared to like in Rebels? And in terms of like her arc, like how do you feel that fits in?
Well, I believe there's about a 10-year gap from here to when Rebels starts. So this is like teenage Hera, and we get an adult, 20, maybe even 30-something Hera in Rebels. We get some background, that she is a pilot by that point, so her love of ships and wanting to be a pilot. Her relationship with her father, Cham. I don't know. I think we get to see why she is in the rebellion or the pre-rebellion, but we don't get a fully realized picture of her and her father. I think that is fleshed out in some storyline in Rebels.
Yeah, well, I think we get a much better picture of Hera's relationship with Ryloth, because like she's one of the main characters in Rebels, and she's off all over the galaxy fighting for the rebellion. And then there is an episode where she comes back to Ryloth to fight, and she interacts with her dad. And like she's lost her accent by the time of Rebels, but when she goes back to Ryloth, like she regains it, which is, I mean, like I pick up my Canadian accent again after spending a few hours talking with my family. So like I get that, and it feels really honest. But like this idea of like she's just a teen right now when things are going terribly, terribly, terribly wrong on Ryloth, right? Like her parents are being imprisoned, the Empire is turning against them. So this like relationship with her home planet is being kind of destroyed right now, and I think we get to see that quite a bit later in Rebels. And so like I think Hera feels like Hera, but a younger Hera.
Yeah.
Whereas like Chopper 100% feels like Chopper. And I'm here
for it. For sure.
Code switching of accents, I think, is very important to her character. Just to clarify, most of the Twi'leks on Ryloth speak English with a French accent.
Right.
And I think that is a deliberate thing done by the creators to remind us of Vichy France, which was the occupied portion of France during World War II. And they had a government, France was still a country occupied by Germany, and there was this puppet government. And I think that we're supposed to think that Orn Frita is that, kind of puppet Twi'lek who is submissive to the Empire. And then the freedom fighters kind of represent de Gaulle's forces.
Yeah, J. Scotty, you were going to say something, right?
No, if you've got a point to follow up on that, please. My point was much less eloquent. I was going to talk about having little exposure to Chopper.
But loving him so much.
Yes, exactly.
When I watched the first episode of this arc, I was kind of sort of taken aback by the accents, and I realize now, though, that's because I watched Rebels in Spanish, and if they were speaking Spanish with a French accent, my Spanish is not good enough to recognize that. And so here, I was sort of like, oh, but then, hearing that point, I think Matthew or J. Scotty, you made it last week about, the sort of Vichy France, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it, and I can appreciate it. And then this episode I watched, and I was like, all right, it makes sense. I think if I'd seen those episodes of the Rebels in English and recognized that, I think here it would have, there's a lot of things that, like, when taking out of context, I mean, Star Wars has not the best history of, accents being represented in particularly in the Phantom Menace, I would say. Yeah. And so, there was a part of me that kind of was like, kind of like bristled a little bit, but seeing it as that clear of a sort of, a metaphor or analogy, not an analogy, I don't know. Like a callback. Basically as an analog for that. Yeah, it I think it really works. And I do feel like this episode did a good job of sort of taking Hera, like the first episode was sort of like, here's Hera a while ago. And then this episode felt sort of like, here's how Hera started to move in the direction of where she ended up, where she was in Rebels, where she pilots a ship, she also I thought it was a little, like Hunter not wanting to do the thing and Omega being like, oh, let's do the thing. Like, I was kind of like, I don't know. But the fact that she sold him on it by being like, let's come up with a really good strategic plan, and then he'll be like, okay, well, that's a good plan, so we'll do it. I personally really appreciated that. And, like, in terms of strategic thinking, at least within, like, specific confines, children can really excel at an extraordinary level. Like, the best chess players in the world became amazing chess players as teenagers, or I think the most recent, like, there's just been the youngest grandmaster ever, like, a few weeks ago or something. And so the idea that they could come up with, and it was pretty straightforward, but it was like, yeah, she had knowledge of the planet, she knew kind of what was vulnerable, and she had been spying on it in the first episode, kind of like innocently, but it's like now it kind of turns out, to have been effective, and I felt like everything did kind of come together really good in that regard. And Chopper was, of course, delightful. I've been feeling like this show is missing a droid protagonist for most of it. Like, I feel like my Star Wars experience involves having a droid of significance that feels like a character.
You don't think Gronk is a droid of significance?
Not at all.
Not yet, anyway.
Well, you guys are just piling on along with Hunter. Come on now. A little hope.
There was... I mean, I did think it was nice that, it was like, well, he's, defective or whatever, but like us. Or, and that did make him feel more like part of the Bad Batch. Although their, like, defectiveness is, like, they're better than the other...
They're defective like X-Men.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And like, if they took him out on some missions, I think he could definitely become a droid of significance. But he just like trash cans around on the ship, and yeah.
Right. Gets curled by Wrecker.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us about Chopper, J. Scotty.
Oh, I was just going to say, I hadn't had much exposure to him, but I said in the last episode, he has so much personality with the little arms and the wub-wubs, and I love that he got to have his little covert operation where he was very effective, and he was doing what he was supposed to do right up there until the end when it all fell apart. But, just super endearing, and love to get exposed to these characters. It makes me want to go out and seek Rebels just to understand why people get so excited to see these characters make their appearances here.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely should. Rebels was amazing. Chopper might be my favorite character.
Oh, wow.
I feel like I've said this about like everything I like, but I mean, like, I love me a sassy droid. I love R2-D2, and I feel like Chopper just like amplifies the sass by like 10, but is also just like, yeah, Chopper's great. Chopper's so endearing, like you were saying, and I'm really glad we got to see him be his like full-fledged self, because yeah, his character doesn't change a whole bunch in Rebels, and I mean, like, he's an immortal droid. Why? Yeah, I mean, like,
right.
Not that droids can't go through character development or anything like that, but his personality is already like fully fleshed out at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a teenager or a little kid. Like,
exactly.
It's a droid. It could be born or created, or it could be 1,000 years old. We don't know.
Yeah.
Right? There is a really good droid character arc in Rebels. I won't spoil it or anything, but that was one of the things I really enjoyed in the show. So definitely watch Rebels.
Yeah.
Will do.
And yeah, like I said, I think we are planning on doing a podcast about that probably after Bad Batch, but who knows?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
One of the things I really love about Chopper is the decision that they made regarding his, I guess, language. R2 speaks like only in beeps and whistles that is incomprehensible, other than kind of the tone and how C-3PO responds.
Yeah.
But Chopper is like, it's modified English, right? Like, you can almost make out those words sometimes, like "uh-oh" or something.
Sure.
And so I really like that, because it helps us to learn that character better and get to know them in a different way that isn't just other characters responding to the beeps and whistles.
That's a totally fair point, because it makes me think of that moment where Hera was kind of sulking after being initially rejected by Hunter, and he has that vocalization like or whatever it was, and it's like you don't even need the subtitles to know that he's kind of admonishing her a little bit, like, you're better than this, like, don't give up, like, you can make this happen. Yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah, and like I love R2's beeps and whistles. I like that you can sort of put in whatever dialogue your heart desires into that. But it does leave us with, like, if R2's just out on his own, yeah, it's the problem
what
you're
do you do?
describing, Riki, right? It's like he needs someone to like make pedantic comments and like kick him every once in a while. He needs his counterpart.
Or as we sometimes suspect, 3PO could just be interpreting incorrectly on purpose.
Oh.
Like, I've had that suspicion sometimes.
Really? That's fair.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which is why R2 gets even angrier with him.
I just imagine R2's just like constant curse words coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Chopper.
That's why it's all beeps.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like Chopper, you do get a really good sense of like what he's actually saying, like what the English equivalent of what he's saying is. And there's more, R2 has his, like, scream beeps when you know what that means. But, yeah, there's just more range in his woobs to, like, pitch range, I guess. Yeah. I don't know if that made any sense, but...
No, yeah. I think we're all on board. Yeah.
And the little arms. I love Chopper. He's so good, yeah.
I feel like Chopper's a little bit like R2 in the Clone Wars, I think is more expressive than R2 in the original trilogy films anyway. Yeah. And also maybe the prequel trilogy. And Chopper, to an extent, feels a little bit like an extension of that, where in the Clone Wars, I think they made R2 a little more active. I mean, all of a sudden could fly. Like,
well, that was an Attack of the Clones. As a prequelist, I have to bring up. That was
that's
in the,
true.
On Geonosis and the Droid Factory was the first showcasing of his little jets there.
Right. So then the prequels kind of went in that direction, and then the Clone Wars took it further in that direction.
Right.
And I have to imagine some of it has to do with technology, you know? Like in terms of the original trilogy, R2, like there's only so much that you can do with stuff, you know, then. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like then R2 got like a little like OP, you know? Yeah. and Chopper, since Chopper was always the way Chopper is, it feels more consistent to me. Like a little less kind of like plot armor, or just like can do whatever the plot wants.
When he was like struggling to take out the cannons, right? Like he's got his little phalange thing in there and is like zipping it around to shut down like the garbage compactors or to do anything that ever needs to be done. And just like straight up can't do it, right? So he's like fallible.
So what do we call that? We have Deus Ex Machina. What do we call it when the Machina fails like this?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Because that was also a very good part of this episode and the plot when, you know, the plan fails and they have to adapt a new plan.
Yeah.
Which was, for me, kind of ridiculous. You know, like, we're going to hijack this shuttle that isn't very well defended, but also has weapons? Like, isn't this just a transport shuttle?
Yeah.
That did stick out to me a little bit easier. It's like, nobody ever has to hotwire a single vehicle. We saw it in Solo, in the opening sequence of Solo, but other than that, it's just like you can hop in a cockpit and you're pretty much good to go.
They don't use keys?
I mean, they leave the doors open all the time. You know that.
True.
At least have like the thumbprint.
Just random Boba Fett's can wander in and take their armor back.
Yeah. It did feel like they probably could have just flown in and shot at them from the first place. Like, they probably didn't need all the... because their workaround was so like, oh, that worked, it felt like they didn't really need this whole plan in the first place.
Right, so instead of flying in with their shuttle and shooting at stuff, they can hijack a shuttle that's already there and shoot at stuff.
Okay, but so I want to like circle back to what Paul said earlier about like Grandmaster chess prodigies, to like a fun little story that does tie into this, I promise. So I was like watching a Twitch stream of a Grandmaster play chess because Twitch is great. And yeah, he's playing against this opponent who ended up beating him like really quickly. And the Grandmaster is like, okay, I think he's on this strategy. No, he's on this strategy. No, he's on this strategy. He's like, wait, what is this guy doing? And he ended up beating the Grandmaster, and he like messages him. And it's like some kid who's been playing chess for 2 weeks and has no idea what they're actually doing, but just like was doing enough things that the Grandmaster thought that he was on these strategies. So that's like kind of like what, was it Echo or was it Tech said to... Tech was like, yes, they're also confused by you flying around erratically, having no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
Such a great line.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that like beginner's luck in that maybe the troopers on the ground are expecting the people in this piloting this transport to be competent and are very confused.
Yeah, and there's a tradition of that in Star Wars, but it was less annoying here than in The Phantom Menace, when Anakin just like accidentally fires a photon torpedo like and blows everything up conveniently.
Or anything Jar Jar.
This was much more deliberate, but still erratic.
Yeah.
Right.
That line that Tech gave stuck out to me as well, because not only was it hilarious, but I kind of wondered, is like Tech learning sarcasm? Because earlier in the episode when Hunter took down the probe droid and it just like landed flat, he was like, oh great, a probe droid. And I was like, that's so weird coming from Tech of all people. Normally he's like so matter of fact, just deliver the information as it is. I was like, he's getting a little bit of a personality here.
It's usually super literal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't even pick up on that, but you're right. It's great. Sarcastic Tech. I'm here for it. Character growth.
On the note of like sticking up for droids and bots, like droids definitely or bots can definitely beat humans at chess. So they certainly excel. That would be my first suspicion when a noob beats like a grandmaster is like, oh, they're probably using an engine.
Yeah, that could be, I guess. Yeah.
Which has been a lot in the chess news recently over the last couple of years, sadly. But
my illusions.
I mean, that's not necessarily what that was. I don't know the specific example. I have watched a lot of chess on Twitch though as well, because it does really well on Twitch. I wanted to circle back to the feedback that I think I mentioned in the beginning from BVK about being pleased to see Regs finally standing up to the Empire's treatment of the Twi'leks. Like, do we think that this is like the beginning of a clone rebellion, or is it more just like a kind of local thing? Like,
I mean, we have to get rid of the clones somehow, right? Because like they're gone by the time.
Right.
We start a new hope.
Well, they would age out, right? Basically, don't they age
yeah.
super fast?
Not super fast. We see clones in
relatively
Rebels who seem to have aged
right.
a normal amount. But yeah,
That's
so you're right. If they're not making any more, they would just be very old by the time of A New Hope.
I'm not saying you're wrong though. Like I do think like something clearly happens, right? I mean, maybe they just discontinue the program, they get old, and it doesn't seem like the Empire would be like, oh, all these highly trained soldiers, yeah, you all just go retire.
Yeah.
It feels not very Palpatine-ness.
The franchise has a little bit of a tradition of revisionist history, so I wouldn't completely be taken out of it if we found out that there was some mass extermination of a large contingency of clones that were revolting or something like that. But if we have Order 66 and that one just kind of like in this history and we were never touched upon it until this point, I would be a little scratching my head a little bit there, but like I said, it wouldn't take me out too much.
Yeah, towards the beginning of the series, we had Tarkin making the economic argument against clones, that saying that they were too expensive. And I think this will probably be the catalyst for Rampart reporting to Tarkin and making this follow-up argument of, look at how many clones, laid down their arms in this situation. Like, they're not suitable for what we need them to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Like, I know we've seen it mostly with Hauser, but, I mean, I guess he was the only clone we really got a whole bunch of FaceTime with other than Troop 99. But this idea of, like, the clones weren't, like, all-out baddies. And, yeah, Order 66 got them to execute the Jedi, but, like we're seeing here, it didn't seem to affect much other than that. So, theoretically, their underlying morals are still there, so I wouldn't be surprised by an all-out clone rebellion.
And, like, there might not have been any Jedi on Ryloth, so the clone troopers on Ryloth maybe didn't have that sort of... I feel like executing Order 66 is sort of like crossing a threshold into villainy in a way, or into like doing something for the Empire that's like just assassinating the people you've been working with or under for so long feels like even if it was not something you did by choice, I mean, maybe you don't know it was a chip, right? But it's something you did, or something they did, and yeah.
We've got the first-hand accounts from both Rex and Wrecker where they actively tried to fight against it. So, yeah, I have to imagine, like, if you were actively trying to, like, fight against something so fervently, and then you still had to do it, something would probably just break inside of you. And just going forward, you probably would lose a bit of your morality and humanity there.
Mm.
Yeah, like, to me it feels like it would be something that would be hard to come back from, because I think people often try to justify our actions, right? And so doing something bad that maybe wasn't our faults, like, maybe makes us more likely to do that in the future, just because we don't want to feel bad about the thing we did.
That's fair. Totally fair.
Yeah, I could see that. And, like, killing Jedi being the gateway to the dark side is sort of like a well-established thing in Star Wars history.
That's true.
It's happened a few times. Yeah. Speaking of the light and the dark, I thought the lighting and the shadows were so good in, like, particularly when Rampart is, like, standing back in the shadow and then, like, comes out into the, you know, the big square to address people. Like, you know, the I don't know, I'm just very impressed by the lighting in this show, like, the animation in general, but
lighting stood out to me as well. It wasn't that scene in particular, but when Tech was above the controls of the shuttle, and just the true blacks that we had even on his silhouette and on the dashboard, and just his face being illuminated by the illumination of the buttons and whatnot, as well as the outside environment, just so cinematic, so beautiful. Every single shot always impresses. It's worth just pausing any frame that you're on and just taking in all the details. That's the quality of the show.
I agree.
My favorite animation moment, visual moment, was the shots of the refinery at night. I just really liked that, the lighting effects there. So I'm glad that they staged that attack at night. Just, you know, it makes logical sense, but also just it was beautiful.
Yeah, explosions look prettier at nighttime.
Very true.
Right. Yeah, I thought that scene looked great, and also feels a little evocative of a particular part of Rebels.
Okay.
Where maybe they're attacking something that's a little similar towards the end, which is like a very significant moment for Hera.
Okay, yeah.
It kind of sort of evokes that feeling for me, which is, I imagine, deliberate, given how much attention they pay to detail. I feel like there is a little bit of I mean, it looked beautiful on its own, but also kind of brings back, you know, if you've seen Rebels. And then maybe if you see Rebels down the line, then that'll bring back this, you know?
Yeah. I didn't make that connection until you just mentioned it, but yeah, totally. And I think that's definitely on purpose, especially with the sort of like Riki had pointed out, the callback title and just like dealing with these same characters. For sure.
Yeah, like, I hadn't noticed it until Riki mentioned how you know, the look of it. I'm like, oh, like, the look is, like, both just visually stunning, but also has this, like, emotional resonance for me now that I think about it. Now I want to rewatch. Good thing I'm, like, halfway through the second watch, so now I get to just go and watch that part and enjoy it with that context. That's basically everything I have on my outline. Well, that's way more than I have on my outline. But does anybody else have any points that they wanted to bring up that we haven't really worked in so far?
Well, I guess I want to talk about where we're going from here. You know, we said earlier that this seems to be setting up a final confrontation between the Bad Batch and Crosshair. Do we think, you know, Tarkin's going to make another appearance here in this series? How does Rampart play out? You know, is he one of those one-season villains that needs to die at the end of this? Or will he somehow continue on in the Star Wars franchise and take on a bigger role somewhere? Those are the questions I have.
Are you hoping that Thrawn comes in?
No.
We got all excited when we saw his office last episode.
I'm always hoping Thrawn comes in. And yeah, like there were, in the last episode when they're at Cham's, I believe, house, I think there are scenes that take place there in Rebels, and so I definitely noticed like similar architecture or rooms that did get me excited.
Yeah,
but we don't have to have Thrawn in everything.
Right. I was looking for the thing, I forget what it was called.
Yes.
That Hera goes for, right? But I didn't see it. But it definitely, this is a setting in Rebels. It's a setting in Clone Wars. And I wouldn't expect to see Thrawn, but I do expect we'll see Tarkin. I think we might see a scene between Rampart and Tarkin.
Yeah.
Or somehow Tarkin coming in to deal with the clone rebellion, even if it's not really a rebellion, it's like 3 to 5 of them or whatever. I think that will be brought to Tarkin's attention in a way that we see. I also imagine we'll go back and we'll see the Kaminoans. That's got to kind of resolve to some extent, I think. But I imagine Rampart he doesn't seem to me like a villain who's going to, like, bite it in this season. Because, like, he's never in contact with the protagonist, basically. I feel like the showdown is going to be Crosshair and the Bad Batch and them trying to, like, bring him back. And I think probably failing. But I don't know. That's sort of my projection.
Yeah, in terms of Admiral Rampart and whether or not he's going to be, like, a one-off villain or not, I kind of hope that he's not. Because the only way I really see that working in any kind of satisfying way is if he kind of serves the role of proto-Krennic for Tarkin, where he's the one that's saying, we should make the move from clone soldiers to conscripted soldiers, and then we find out those exact reasons why, and then Tarkin can kind of swoop in, depose of him, and be like, oh, that was my idea all along, and just kind of continue to move up the ladder.
Yeah. That'd be interesting.
I don't know if we want to see that again since we've already seen it with Krennic. But.
Yeah. What about Vader? Do we think we might get a Vader cameo towards the end here somehow?
Ooh.
Because I've always been curious. Like, Vader has his, like, stormtrooper group, right? The 501st.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which he had, Anakin had at the end of the Clone Wars. But we know, like, it somehow transitions from clones to conscripted stormtroopers. So I wonder if we might get to see that, and maybe like Vader's 501st is like the first of the new stormtrooper.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. And so do you think we're done with Fennec Shan and Cad Bane?
Ooh, no, I don't.
Okay.
I hope not.
Yeah, I think when the Kaminoans circle back in, I think at least Fennec, I think, will circle back in. Probably Cad Bane as well, because I would imagine they're both still retained for their services, as they did not complete the mission. I guess Fennec succeeded in a way, right?
Yeah. Well, she was kind of like, "Call me if you need me."
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So,
okay. I take back my Vader cameo. I think we need the Boba Fett cameo.
Oh yeah.
Because that's been kind of like a long rumored, speculated thing of the Boba Fett Cad Bane showdown. And kind of passing the mantle of the best bounty hunter.
And, like, Fennec has to meet up with Boba at some point, too, right? But that can be way in the future. How old is Boba now-ish?
Late teen, maybe? Early, mid-teen? I don't know. Boba Fett, like, grew up a lot just during the Clone Wars, I feel like.
Yeah.
Maybe some accelerated clone growth.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Omega in Season 2 is, like, a teenager, not, like... a year older than she is here, but
are we getting another season? Is that confirmed?
I don't know.
I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but I would have to imagine.
It's a good show. I like it.
He's gonna milk that cash.
Yeah. Yeah. They could do more different types of animated series. Like season 9 could be not the Bad Batch season 2. It could be. I'm interested in what's going on with Vader during this time period, but. He doesn't feel connected to this story really in any way so far, so I feel like there could be like some post-credit scene or whatever, but I feel like Boba Fett is a much more... Boba Fett's been named, right? Or referenced, and so I do expect we'll see Boba Fett maybe just like in a moment or something, and then if there are multiple seasons of this show, then... I think would maybe become a more significant character, kind of circling like through and in and out of the plot.
Yeah, I like the idea of further seasons. Maybe like you're saying, a season 9 of Clone Wars. How this is season 8, like season 7. we got the Bad Batch, but it was mostly like an Ahsoka storyline. And so then like season 8 being Bad Batch, and then like getting a season 9 of Darth Vader or some other character we were introduced to in Clone Wars who never really got that like bow put on them. Could be cool.
Yeah. So the Boba reference, I mean, when the Kaminoans were talking about Omega, they were saying that she was basically the last of the, I guess, pure or something genetic material from Jango Fett, and that's why she's Omega, like the last one. And they mentioned that Boba was the Alpha.
Yep.
Right.
Line. So if they need that genetic material for whatever, then Boba Fett should probably be in the storyline, because he could be another source of that.
Yeah, I just want to echo your point, Riki, from I guess was it episode 9 about kind of I also don't understand why Omega having Jango's like pure, like what's so important about Jango's DNA, like being like specifically like, oh, this one person. Maybe it's like it's just hard to find someone who's so easily clonable or something. I don't know, but I feel like they haven't really explained much of that so far.
Yeah. And all it takes is like a few lines of techno jargon about cloning.
Sure.
And like why only certain people are suitable for cloning.
Listen, we've already mass-produced the suits, so they're only going to fit
Exactly.
These new clones are too tall.
Yeah. I mean, it could be they tried like 1,000 or 100,000 different donors, and it's like they finally got one that worked, and they're like, we don't want to go through another 100,000 donors to find another one who works. We're going to use this. It works well with our existing technology.
Well, we saw that abandoned Kaminoan facility on Bespin in the episode that had the fight with Cad Bane and Finn Shannock, Fennec Shan, excuse me. So it really makes you wonder how many of their own people did they experiment on before they perfected this process. Sure. How many? I mean, they're obviously cold and calculating, but how many subjects are they willing to subject to this experimentation to achieve the result? So.
Yeah.
Yes. And what is the end result? Is it Snoke? Speaking of like speculation,
it's Palpatine, right? That's the final.
For better or for worse.
Because if it's all connected like on an MCU level, I do feel like somehow we have to go from Kaminoans to like Palpatine / Snoke cloning nonsense. Yeah. Which is
I'm fine
kind
with
of a
it
groan,
not being all connected on an MCU like level, but I'll take the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. timeline or whatever, but or I'll take the Netflix timeline. I do think Boba Fett makes a ton of sense, though, as like not just a cameo, but like a character who is now integral to the plot, right? So Boba Fett actually showing up would make a lot of sense. Also, in December, Book of Boba Fett is coming out. So it seems like a really good marketing tie-in, kind of self-promo sort of, like when the Kenobi show is coming out, maybe then you have Vader show up because you're gonna have Vader show up in that show, right? So I think Boba Fett makes all the sense for like all the reasons right now, and I will now be surprised if we don't see him. And like I guess disappointed. I wouldn't have been disappointed before, but now I'm going to be disappointed. So.
It's good. That's why we're here, setting you up for disappointment.
Awesome. Thank you.
Don't believe in the Mephisto of it all.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
If we're like throwing, I want to see Hondo Ohnaka.
Yes.
Oh. That's who I thought you were going to say, Riki, when you're like, who we can see. I thought you were going to go for Hondo, but I mean, Boba makes more sense.
Hondo is fun. I would
like
love Hondo. But he's not integral to like the history of Star Wars in a way that even Boba Fett is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair. But he is
for sure
awesome.
Yes.
So
agreed.
And any other last things?
I think we pretty comprehensively covered this one.
And then some other stuff too.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to plug their things that get plugged?
No, I'll take the opportunity to plug my podcast. It's part of the Stranded Panda Network. It's Animation Deliberation. So that's one of the original reasons we started this partnership with Star Wars Universe Podcast, because we love to celebrate animated action series just like this. So it's been a blast to cover this one, and we do have Masters of the Universe Revelations just around the corner. So we're going to be doing a primer episode on some of the standout episodes from the classic series. So look forward to that, and look forward to that new series coming out. Animation Deliberation, wherever you find your podcasts.
And I guess like we've teased it a little bit, but we're going to be talking Rebels on Star Wars Universe podcast sooner or later, so stay tuned for that.
And how many seasons is Rebels? 4? 5?
That's an excellent question. I think
4.
5? It's 4?
Okay.
I think so,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I was
Not
certain
enough.
until you said 5.
I binged it. Well, we binged it, so it's like, it kind of all bleeds together.
Yeah.
But yes, not enough. I agree with that.
Yeah, I recommend Rebels. I look forward to your coverage of it. Maybe I'll join at some point here or there. I always thought I would for the Clone Wars and never did. But maybe it's Matthew doesn't like editing 4-person. No, he always invited me. But
We're just one
4
audio
person.
file.
I'm
It's
about
fine.
to find out how editing a 4-person podcast is. So we'll see on that experiment.
Well, we do have Ash in the chat is letting us know for
Oh.
sure that it is 4. She gave it a goog, so thank you, Ash.
Yay.
Goog,
Yeah.
gave it a quick goog. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like it's 15 episodes, 22, and then 16 is the season lengths. So it's a little deeper goog there. But and I'm looking forward to the He-Man coverage on. That was like one of my favorite shows as a kid. I think the second time I dressed up for Halloween, it was as He-Cat.
Ooh,
I identified with Cringer as much as with He-Man. But I'm Zen Madman on Twitch and on Twitter. You can find me there, and I do various things, including live streaming this podcast, which has been really fun. Thank all of you for joining me and we getting through this experience together, and to the people in the chat as well. Thank you for the gentle trolling, Ashley. That actually is like the opposite of trolling. I was expecting some trolling, but she said that Riki and Sarah, you're too professional. So like, you know.
What? How are we too professional? Do you want me to take down the
I-
screen and show you the horrors that are like us moving our apartment?
That would go a long way, I think. Yeah, but I enjoy the screen. I could work on my background myself. But anyway, on behalf of myself and Sarah, Riki, and Jay Scotty, as well as our host in absentia, Matthew, thank you for listening. And you can reach if you want to send Matthew emails like, "Hey, why did you let this person run your podcast?" You can send that to theethicalpanda@gmail.com, and also give them a follow on what's it called on Twitch at the Ethical Panda. So on behalf of us all, I don't know, like may the force be with you or something, and we'll be with you next week.
Yeah. Paul, real quick, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you. Thanks for filling in to host and for running the Twitch stream and just guiding the conversation. You did a great job, and appreciate you being here and making it happen.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul.
You all made it easy for me.